Good evening and welcome to Education Number One Priority. I'm Dr. Jane Garza. Well, we've started a new school year for the 2015-2016 academic year. And when the legislature meets, there are always academic changes. Changes that require school districts to make modification. And this year is no different. To discuss with us what changes are forthcoming and what we can look forward to in the 2015-2016 academic year, we have our Executive Director from the Educational Service Center from Region 2, Dr. Rick Alvarado. Welcome to Education Number One Priority.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's always a pleasure, and especially changes that transpire, and I know you keep very much attuned to what's going on. But first, let's just talk about you for a minute. You've now been at the Educational Service Center how many years? 2.5 years. 2.5 years. All right. But you've been in the education business for far longer than that.
Yes, this is my 33rd year in K-12 education.
You really must enjoy it.
Oh, I love it. I have great experiences.
Okay. Well, tell me about some of those experiences, because now as the Educational Service Center, you take care of multiple districts, but that must have required some extensive background educational experience.
Yes. Most of my experience was in San Antonio ISD, where I was a teacher of second grade. Then I became a human resources specialist and an assistant principal, a principal. Then I went to Southside ISD and became interim superintendent and associate superintendent for curriculum instruction and assessment. And then went to Region 20 for about 12 years. Okay. And then now 2.5 years here at Region 2 in Corpus Christi.
So basically you had experience not only in the public school settings, but also in the Educational Service Center settings.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, now let's talk about that, because the Educational Service Center, when we think about that, what is the mission of an Educational Service Center?
The mission of an Educational Service Center is to provide high-quality programming for school districts to ensure that they have professional development, technical assistance, and we provide training to teachers, staff members, and to school board members, and to superintendents. So it's a gamut of responsibilities that we do, but our mission is to ensure that we're providing the most current information so that they can make the best decisions on behalf of the kids that they serve.
And basically, for example, let's talk about the Educational Service Center Region 2. I'm going to assume that because this is number 2, there's got to be a 1 and possibly even a 3 and a 4?
Yes, there is. Actually, there's 20 across the state of Texas. And back in the late 1960s, the legislature created regional service centers, and they created 20 service centers that are strategically placed around the state of Texas. We serve 11 counties of the Coastal Bend in Region 2, which comprises 42 traditional districts and 8 charter schools.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about that. So the state of Texas is pretty big, and in fact it's one of the largest states except for Alaska. So we've got 20 service centers throughout the state of Texas.
Yes, ma'am.
And they're charged with what you told me the mission is, making sure that there's quality education in each of those regions. Now you told me how many counties did you serve and how many districts did you serve?
We serve 11 counties in the Coastal Bend, and we serve 42 traditional districts and 8 charter schools.
All right. You know the question is going to be, how can you do that, and how can you follow up to make sure that mission is being honored in every single one of those counties and every one of those districts?
See, and the uniqueness about service centers is that each region in Texas is very different. Okay. So we want to make sure that we address the needs of the local community, which is ours, which is the 11 counties. So we have stakeholder meetings to ensure that districts are getting the information that they need. We're the conduit between Texas Education Agency and school districts, and the legislature. So when the laws are passed, we help to interpret those laws and help them to implement those laws based on our professional development services that we provide.
Okay, so basically you used a keyword, which was you're a conduit. So basically you're that line of communication between not only your educational service center, but the legislature and what they've done, the education, the TEA, Texas Education Aid, and then that district itself. Now, you mentioned 42 school districts, and I'm going to assume they all vary in sizes.
Yes.
So you've got small, medium, and large. How does your service center provide services to these districts?
We provide a lot of services. The important thing to make note is that we're a non-regulatory agency.
Okay.
So we can never tell a district what to do and how to do it. All we provide is best practices. So in that effort to provide best practices is we look around the state of Texas and across the country to say, okay, what's working well with similar type demographics of students? Even though our curriculum may be different, we want to ensure that we're providing districts with those best practices, quality programming, so that they can be able to go back and implement those practices in their classrooms and in their schools.
So in a district, say like Kingsville, that is very different from Bishop, you make sure that best practices are known, but like you stated, you're only the messenger.
Yes.
They decide how to take that message and incorporate.
Yes.
All right.
And the beauty of what we do at our service center is we have highly competent individuals that we call educational specialists. And part of their role when they go to a district such as Kingsville or like Kingsville is that they look at the data for Kingsville ISD. So if they're going to do a district session, they look at the district data. If they're going to do a campus session, they'll look at the campus data. So that when they go present on the topic that they've been asked to present, they can infuse or embed some of that data that says, okay, so here are where your strengths are for your kids, and let's say perhaps mathematics.
Right.
And here's some opportunities based on the data. So let's have a conversation about that. And here's some strategies that you may choose to implement in your school or in your campus as a teacher to be able to make a positive impact on student learning.
So basically, before any of your educational specialists venture into a district, not only do they know their best practices, but they know the district that they're going to, what their performance looks like. And I love the word that you used. They looked at strengths and opportunities. And then you said you have a conversation. So it's here's what can be done, here's how we can support you, but the decision maker of that is ultimately the school district.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, some questions that people sometimes ask me is, what's the difference between a school district and a charter school? So let's just basically just talk about that.
That's a great question. And in Region 2, we have, as I said earlier, we have 8 charter schools. 4 of those charter schools their headquarters are in our region, and then the other 4, their headquarters are in other regions. So, but we support all 8 of them. So what happens is they are a public school, like a traditional public school. What happens there is that they applied, depending on, back in 1995, the legislature granted the existence of charter schools. So the first generation of charter schools started in 1996. So you have some that has been around since 1996. So some of the differences are that when they applied for their charter, they asked for certain modifications to the existing requirements that the law required of districts, such as maybe not certified teachers to meet the highly qualified piece, and other kinds of things. And the reason for that was that the legislature felt that in order to free them from the flexibility to be innovative and to have that flexibility to provide programming that will meet the needs of their particular students, they want to give them some latitude. So that's how they are a little different. They're very similar in that on the financial accountability and academic accountability, charter schools and traditional schools are on the same measurement.
Okay.
And also on the way that TA monitors and accredits the charter school, they're on the same system that traditional public schools are.
What about in terms of assessments?
They're on the same standards that traditional public schools.
So basically, just like a public school gets assessed in terms of STAR, so does a charter school.
Yes.
So the major difference then is the flexibility of not following probably we would say the regiment that a public school would follow.
Some of the laws that our public schools are governed by,
okay,
they may have seek a waiver for that.
Okay. Well, let's continue to talk about charter schools. You said something that I wasn't aware of. You said some are local, but some are founded in other regions, but you still serve them.
Yes.
How is that?
Well, what happens is, and I'll give you an example
Okay.
of Kingsway Learning Academies in Kingsville.
Okay.
And their parent company or parent organization is Jubilee Academy, and they're housed out of San Antonio.
All right.
So what happens is they have satellite campuses. In this case, Jubilee Academy has several. They have some in the Valley, they have some in Corpus Christi, and they're expanding, and they have some in San Antonio. So what happens is instead of sending the teachers to San Antonio
Okay.
to get the professional development, they come to us or we go to them for the economies of scale and
Okay.
to save dollars for their
All right. So
system.
basically then they avail themselves of the services that you have here. Another question that I'm asked about charter schools is, number one, is it free? Or do they charge anything? And how do I make a decision if I'm a parent that I'd like for my child to attend a charter school as opposed to a public school?
They're open enrollment charter schools.
Okay.
So yes, it's free
Okay.
to them. And what happens is I encourage parents, if they're interested in charter schools, to inquire about the charter school and perhaps maybe take a visit. Traditional schools are doing some amazing things as well. So I encourage you to kind of look at the two opportunities that you have for your children and then make the decision that best meets the needs of your particular child.
And I'm glad we're talking about that, and I'm glad our listening audience is listening to this, because so many times people are not aware that they do have a choice. That public schools, as you say, provide great education, but there may be a charter school out there that may meet the individual needs of your child. And since it is free, and like you said, it's open enrollment, and you encourage people to go and visit and compare.
Yes. And then make the best decision for their child.
For their child, all right. Well, you talked about 42 school districts. So how do you partner with these school districts? How is everybody part of this, the Educational Service Center services, or do they elect to be part of that?
Yes, they do. And so just because they're in our region
Okay.
does not mean that they have to get services from us. They can go and choose their provider of choice wherever it is, whether it's another region or an independent provider, independent of us. So that's the flexibility that schools have. So it's very important for us at the Service Center to ensure that we have high quality individuals who know the content, because we want to make sure that we're the first choice for school districts. So we partner with them, as I said earlier, by looking at what their needs are. And sometimes with that critical friend of someone looking out from the outside, looking in their window and saying, I know that you looked at your data, but here's a different perspective of the data. So let's have a conversation about that. And here's what we can do to help you address some of those opportunities that you have in your school district or on your campus. And districts that we have found really love that opportunity, because sometimes you get so caught up in your own world, if you will, that having someone else give you some guidance and some perspective helps kind of think differently about your plan of action of how to best address the needs of your particular campus and on your kids on your campus.
So let's just focus on the ESC2. You said 42 districts, and you have charter schools as well. So are all of them partnering with the Educational Service Center?
Yes. All the charter schools and traditional districts all do some level of service with us. Some do more and some do less. You know, the larger districts don't use us as much as our smaller districts, but that's because of the economies of scale.
Right.
And they have more resources than perhaps maybe a smaller district. So, but all of them participate at some level.
Well, you said something else that I picked up on as you were answering that question. So let's just say I'm a school district. I come to you. So can I elect certain services from the ESC2, or is there a package deal, or can I select a la carte? How does it work?
Great question. Yes, you can. We have what we call a commitment system.
Okay.
So it's on our website, and we give districts an electronic password for them to access that. And then there's a menu of services. It's like a cafeteria style.
Right.
So whatever you think your needs are for your campus or your district that you need, you can subscribe to those services. And that what will happen is a consultant on our end will contact that individual and say, I noticed that you signed up for GT services. Here are the schedule of events that we have, the meetings that we have, the opportunities that you can partake in, the opportunities that teachers have to partake in as a result of being a part of this co-op.
So let's just talk about some of those services. So you have GT, which is gifted and talented. So a district can elect to select that. What other services can they select from?
We have PEAM services, both the student side and the business side. We have MIS services on the technical side. But on the curriculum instruction and assessment side, we have accountability co-op. We also have regional school improvement, and that's for the core content areas where districts can say, you know what, based on our scores from the previous year, we have some deficiencies and opportunities in mathematics and English language arts. So we want to buy some days, and they buy days.
Okay.
And then what happens is when they buy those days, our consultants go to the district, to whomever the contact person is, and say, I noticed that you bought 10 days in mathematics. So let's plan out for the year how you choose to use those 10 days. Because we think it's really important for us to have meaningful conversations and be purposeful about the intent of those days so that staff on our end can do the preparation. Or as I said earlier, we look at the data so that when we go to meet with your teachers, we're really prepared on the skill sets that they need to be successful. And we do the same thing for the content areas. And that's the beauty of going to the service center for that work, because we get state-of-the-art information. We get information from the Texas Education Agency. We have meetings with our stakeholder groups across the state of Texas. So we have a lot of information that we can bring to the table and help teachers be successful with their students.
Well, I ask you that question because so many times parents will say, you know, I'm in a smaller district. I don't have the same type of education that a larger district. But hearing what you're saying is the Educational Service Center provides, and you talked about academic services, PEAMS, which is like a tracking system that school districts have that you're able to provide for them, and the technology piece as well. So really, my next question is pretty easy for you. How do you bridge the gap between that small, medium, and large district?
By those services, by having a menu of services, because what we know is that every community is unique and they have different needs and different wants. So by having a variety of offerings in the spectrum of offerings, it provides them to choose and select what's going to best meet their needs. So for a small district, I'll give you the co-op of the business services.
Okay.
For a small district, we are actually the business office for them. So we do payroll and we do all the business functions because it makes better sense on the economies of scale if we were to do it for them to hire a person to be able to do that, because they may not have the resources, first of all, and it may not be a full-time job for them. So the economies of scale makes better sense for us to help them with that process. So that's how we bridge the gaps between the small district, the mid-sized districts, and large districts. Whereas a large district, they have their own staff to do all of those pieces for them, so they don't rely on us. So they rely on us for other kinds of services.
Now, so there really isn't any reason for a parent to worry about in terms of the operations of a school district, because even though they may be smaller in size, they have the capability of availing themselves of those services.
Yes.
All right. Now let's talk about our legislature. Every time they meet, they do wonderful things, and they make some changes. I know that this past year when the legislature met, we got some additional funding. We got pre-K, some funding for that as well. And then there were some legislations that also occurred. And there were 3 specific ones, and I know you're very much aware of them. And one of those was Senate Bill 149. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it impacts the school districts?
You may have heard about Senate Bill 149 last spring.
Right.
During the graduation time. There was a lot of talk about my child didn't pass 1 or maybe 2 end of course exams and they won't be able to graduate and cross stage. And so what the legislature passed was, right, and it was like early May, right. So districts had a little opportunity to make some adjustments that afforded students and parents and districts to be able to set up certain parameters for them to review on an individual basis whether the child met the standard through other veins. So what happens is the law says that at the end of the 11th grade year, if a student has not passed an EOC, end of course exam, they can qualify under this process, but they cannot graduate prior to their 12th grade year. So what it says is that if a student didn't pass no more than 2 end of course exams, they can go through this graduation committee process. And the way that process works is it's defined in law that says the principal and his or her designee must be part of that conversation. Then the teacher of that course that the student didn't pass, and of course exam didn't pass, has to be part of that conversation. Then the department head or the lead teacher of that content area has to be part of that conversation. And the fourth person is, as appropriate, it's either the parent or guardian of the student. If it's not one of those two, it could be an advocate for the student, and or if the student is 18 years of age or older, they have the option to serve in that role. So they will have a conversation about what the child has done or not done. So then what happens is they will also look at other information. They will look at, so what was the score for that child on the end of course exam? How was their attendance rate? How much remediation have they participated in? What things have they done above and beyond that coursework that they've done? So you look at another academic indicators. And then what happens is the law is very clear, says that those 4 individuals on that committee must have a unanimous decision on whatever that decision is, whether to graduate or not graduate, or give credit for that end of course exam or not. So once the decision is made, a parent or a student cannot appeal, and it becomes final. So then whatever that decision is, that's what it is.
But it really does work to the favor of that student specifically, because you and I know there have been students that have gotten all their credits, they've gotten excellent grade, but there just seems to be a fear of exams sometimes, and they miss the cutoff by 1 or 2 points.
Yes.
So in that particular case, the student at least would say, I've got somebody that would listen, and especially if those end of course scores have been going up, right?
Yes. And it was very rigorous. It wasn't just an automatic pass.
Right.
It was at times, and last year districts did some different things, portfolio assessments, and had to do extra work. So it was not just a given that you were going to get credit for that course.
Okay, so in other words, you had to show that you had done your very best to be able to meet that standard.
That you had mastered those concepts of that standard, yes.
Good. Well, very good. Excellent. Now let's talk about House Bill 743. That's a different one, and that requires the STAR assessments.
Yes, that one is an interesting one. As we all know, parents sometimes talk about the hours that a test takes for their child to take. And so what the law says in this one is that in grades, well, first of all, TA, Texas Education Agency, is required to have an outside independent consultant or company to verify that the tests are valid and reliable for that particular grade level. And we're talking about 3 through 8.
Right.
So then what will happen is in grades 3 through 5, the state says that a test for 85% of those students taking the test should complete that exam in 120 minutes.
Okay.
And no more.
All right.
And then for grades 6 through 8, 85% of those students should be able to finish that test in 180 minutes.
All right.
And then it also says, further stipulation is that all tests must be able to be taken in one day. So it shouldn't be multiple days that the student takes the same test.
Okay. So I know from previous ones, students, you've talked about 180 minutes that they have on that, which is like 3 hours,
right,
as opposed to starting at 8 o'clock and going to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's basically then testing companies are having to look at that?
Yes. Well, one of the issues that arise for this year is that before the law was passed, the test makers already had developed the test.
Okay.
It had already been validated. So what TA has to do now is they have to find a way to redesign the test. So they're going to use this spring's test to be able to make some adjustments and modifications to those exams because they really can't do it for this year. So there's going to be some things put in place, and they're going to do some case studies to talk about, okay, so how do we, testing company, how do you modify this? Because 85% of the students, it took them 4 hours. Yeah. So how do you pare that down to 2 hours for 3 to 5 graders?
Now, it's going to be interesting because there are some students that are just very methodical, and even though you and I it only take 2.5 hours, it may take them 4 hours. So it's going to be interesting to see how this works out. And
it may add to the stress level of students who get stressed taking tests. So.
And to the teachers.
Yes.
Okay. Now, last and final one, House Bill 2349, all right, which requires, again, on the STAR exam. So let's talk about that one.
That one is The agency is trying to find a mechanism or a method to be able to identify those students who come from out of state and are out-of-state testers, so that they can be in the system and so they can be aware of them. So the commissioner set some rules about how that's going to work, and so some of the talk is that there'll be a code on the answer document that says this is an out-of-state tester, they came from wherever that is. So when they check it, so what'll happen is when those grades get reported out, or those scores get reported out, there'll be two different reports, one for the in-state testers and then one for out-of-state testers. So you get a more real score for the kids that you've had over time, as opposed to a child that you've had for maybe a year or less than a year or 2 years.
Do you know, and this may be a question that hasn't even been thought about, are they going to make any special allowances for those students that came from a different state and possibly didn't have the rigor that the Texas system did?
At this point, no, but I'm sure that's part of probably the test process that's going to happen based on the data that we get, is they're going to use that data to make some decisions for maybe perhaps the next legislative session about so what happens and how do we make sure that those kids are benefiting from the system as opposed to not.
And the reason I ask you that is because we have so many military students that transfer from Florida, from Virginia, from San Diego, and yes, their educational system is a little bit different than the Texas system. The reason I asked you very specifically about Senate Bill 149 and House Bill 743 is so our listening audience understands that many of the things we do in the public schools are because of direct mandates from the legislature, and that, you know, we can only do so much, but legislative session also has a big influence on what we do.
Yes.
All right, last and final question. What's the latest on the school finance case?
As you know, the state of Texas was sued based on that the legislature has systemically over time increased the academic standards for students. However, they didn't adequately fund that so that students in schools could increase their performance. So in 2013-2014 school year, they spent about 4 months with over 90 people testifying about this case and the effects it had on that. So then State District Judge John Dietz ruled that the current system of funding schools was violated the Texas Constitution, because he said that the state did not provide enough money that adequately provided resources for districts to support education, and also the equity in the resources that rich districts have as opposed to poor districts. So they had some testimony on September 1st, but there's no decision yet, and there's no timeline for a decision to be handed down.
So therefore, it is still in the Supreme Court's case, and they're reviewing it, and we'll soon find out what the end result is.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate always and you coming in and letting us know what's going on in the education world.
Well, thank you.
Well, as you know, this has been education #1 priority, and I'm Dr. Mary Jane Garza. Thank you.